one time had a friend tell me that he was trying to be less judgmental in his life. That he didn't want to assume something about someone based on his own bias. For example, he explained, when I see someone riding a bike, my first thought is, that's really unfortunate that they don't have a car. But that's not the only reason to ride a bike. That's an assumption. They could be choosing to ride a bike for any number of reasons. For exercise, to do something good for the environment. Maybe they're trying to save some money for something wonderful they want to do. Just don't know. But it's really easy to make that assumption. This is why we have the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Because it's too easy to do just that. For example, take that woman in our gospel reading today. What did you hear about her in the reading? What were some of the things that described her, or what she did in the reading? What did you hear? She's a sinner. First and foremost, right? It says it about 4 times. She's a sinner. Did you hear anything else? She was uninvited, true. She was not wanted there. Yes, she leads a sinful life. Yeah. What we don't hear, but many people assume, and none of you did, which I like, that's wonderful. What we hear often is that she's a prostitute. That's not at all what it says, but that's what we assume. Because often when we read the Bible, and we're talking about a woman who is sinful, oftentimes we're also told she's a prostitute. But that's not what this woman, that's not what we're told about this particular woman. She may have been, but that would be a judgment that we would make based on our own perspective. So we make judgments. And so do the people in this story about this woman. They call her a sinner. She leads a sinful life. She is someone outside what is right. Someone who could not be touched and could not touch others for fear of contamination. Someone who is to be shunned because of her sinfulness. All they see is the cover, the outside of this woman's life. But what we find out later in the story is Jesus sees the whole story. The host, Simon, he definitely just sees the outside. He judges that woman. But he also judges Jesus. He refuses to offer Jesus common courtesy when he enters his home. And he believes that Jesus has no respect for the law when he allows that sinful woman to touch him. And the others at the dinner party, they judge Jesus too when he claims to forgive the woman's sin. They all judge Jesus like the cover of a book, and they can't see the whole story in their judgment. Judging others is something that we're pretty good at. Something that almost happens without us even thinking about it all the time. We judge people by their clothes, by their looks, by their job, by their car, by all sorts of things. Like my friend was dealing with, it can be this simple assumption based on our own experiences and not at all on the experiences of the person we're looking at. And sometimes we judge people because they don't live up to our expectations of what we think they should be. But either way, if we're judging someone else, it rarely, if ever, brings us closer to God. At Synod Assembly this past week, we had these little workshops, and I attended a workshop that looked at the future of the church. What did we want the future of the church to look like? And there were people there talking about what they hoped to see in the church and how they hoped to reach people and bring people in. And at one point they were discussing young adults and youth and how do we connect with them. And there happened to be a high school student in the room who they finally got smart enough to ask, what do you want to see in the church? I was impressed they even thought to ask, what do you want to see in the church? And this young woman replied immediately and very straightforwardly. She said, I'm looking for a church where I can be accepted for who I am. and she talked about some of this stuff, where her tattoos weren't looked down on, where her size didn't dictate how she was addressed, where her clothing would not draw unappreciative stares or comments. And for some of the others in the room, that was kind of surprising. The reality is, those judgments happen all the time. And they happen in our churches. They happen in this church sometimes. And they get communicated whether we want them to be communicated in a certain way or not. People know what we're thinking. We may not necessarily appreciate the look of a tattoo, but for the person who has them, they have meaning, or at least make a statement. We may look at someone who is not an average body type, larger or smaller, and we might imagine they take care of themselves. When in reality, there may be some kind of a medical condition involved, or they may simply be happier and more confident the way they are. We may look at that person that comes in with the ripped jeans and the dirty shoes and see someone who doesn't respect this place or God. But maybe they've just come from work or somewhere else and they've made it a priority to be here. Or maybe they've chosen to wear something that is comfortable to them, that allows them to focus more fully on the worship and less about whether their collar is too tight. When we judge someone on the outside by their cover without knowing anything about them or their story, we end up pushing away someone who could learn something from. Someone that we could connect with in some way. It's easy to judge those who are not like us, to make assumptions about someone's value based on what we think we might know, without actually knowing anything about them. The overall theme for the Synod Assembly this past week was racial injustice, a recognition that for too long we have judged people by the color of their skin or the country they come from, a realization that we can no longer remain unfazed by the collective judgment that is a part of our culture, a decision that we must take the uncomfortable step to look beyond the book cover and realize that there are lives that matter that we've never thought about before. The assembly discussions were just the beginning. They were one step in recognizing that we are called to leave judgments and book covers behind. That as people forgiven and claimed by God, we must look deeper than the book covers. But like Jesus, we need to think about and then offer acceptance and grace and forgiveness. The woman in our story today experiences judgment from her society as a whole. She was judged unworthy and kept out of just about everything that mattered. But Jesus doesn't judge her. At least not in the same way that other people do. Jesus showed her compassion. Jesus showed her that she was loved. And he recognizes her faith despite what other people are telling him about her. Jesus points out all the good things about this woman and how she interacts with Jesus, how she's honored him, how she trusts him, how she believed that she was forgiven and made right with God, even though the rest of society told her there was no way that was true. And Jesus defends her. And then he proclaims the forgiveness that everyone else needed to hear and that she already knew. They judged her, but Jesus loved her. I like to hope that at least for one person at that dinner party, one person was able to take away some understanding, some desire to look beyond the cover of someone else's life, to get to know someone and understand where they were coming from, to really listen to the story of the person that they came in contact with and respond accordingly. Because they watched Jesus look closer, look inside. Jesus looks into our inside, seeing all the inner workings that make up our plans and our decisions. Jesus sees the story that's beneath the cover, fully aware of our motivations and our thoughts and where we've been and where we're going. Jesus loves us, knowing that whole story, knowing our sinfulness and our mistakes, forgiving us for our judgments and our shortcomings, and calling us to be more than that, less judgmental, and to follow in his footsteps. For Jesus, we are not just a couple. We are not just a judgment or two. We are not just one thing. Instead, with that woman in our reading today, we are a complete story. A story with twists and turns, with highlights and darkness, with joys and love and pain and sorrows.